Hello, this is Christopher Kim. Today, I'll be explaining about the insight on UFC fighting style from the historical data. My research question is how the performance of the UFC fighters had impacted on their outcome of the fight. For the project, I used Python to collect and scrape the data and make a visualization. UFCstats.com reveals all the fights that occurred for the past 2 decades. When I click on an event, it contains several fights, and each fight shows who won and who lost. It also reveals the total stats of each of 2 fighters, such as total strike, takedowns, submission attempts, and etc. I collected the data in 2 steps. First, I got the unique ID of each fight, and then I went through each fight and got the detailed data. I used the pandas library to manage the data as the data frame, which is also known as TF. And I used the matplotlib library to make all the graphs. First, for the first data, I show the top 10 fighters who have the most wins. As you can see, I put all the names of the fighters with their numbers of the wins. We can see that number 1 is Jim Miller, and the last fighter is Max Holloway. For the second data, I got the most common match ending. I put all the methods that fighters can win with the numbers of the matches. We can see that most common win is by decision, especially unanimous decision. I also analyzed how the UFC became more famous over time. As you can see, the UFC started their journey in 1993. 3 years after Dana White bought the UFC, which he bought in 2001, the UFC began to rise their fame really quickly. Then they reached their peak in 2014, and since then it has similar numbers through 2022. Even though the COVID started to spread, which was from 2020 to 2021, they still operate their events through the UFC site and conduct the event without any audiences. For 2023, since it still hasn't completed all the event, it is lower than the other years from 2014 to 2022. Also, when you look at the right graph, it shows the number of unique fighters for each year, which also shows the popularity of the UFC because more fighters are participating in the UFC since Dana White bought the UFC. It increased from the 2004 to 2014, and since then, from 2014 to 2022, the numbers are similarly consistent, but there is still a slight increase in the numbers. From this slide, I show the average takedown and submission attempt of the fight and the evolution of fight outcome over time. As you can see from the left side, we have the average takedowns and submission attempts per fight. We can see that takedown attempts are increasing throughout the year, but surprisingly, the submission attempts are decreasing compared to the past. It is an interesting outcome because when people think of submission attempts, they think fighters need to attempt to take down the opponent and submit the opponent. However, this shows that it is not the case. For the right side, we can see that I made a stack plot. Unlike the other graph, this shows the percentage of the fight outcome via area. When you see this graph, both areas of unanimous decision and split decision are increasing. But areas of submission and KO or TKO are decreasing compared to decision. This is because as the method and the game of the UFC become more modernized, how fighters fight in the UFC becomes smarter and acknowledges the game. Thus, even though there are more takedowns attempts, it becomes even harder to finish the opponent by submission or KO or TKO due to the opponents knowing how to escape from those situations. For another note, KO or TKO actually has higher area than that of submission finishes from the right graph. Well, this is because fighters try to knock people down more than submitting someone, since fans and spectators want to see more KO or TKOs than the submission due to more excitement and the violence. For this slide, I show the average significant strike of the winner and the average significant KO of the winner. We can see that both graphs have a similar pattern, and percentages from 1993 to 2005, where more significant strikes means more KOs. However, Since then, a more significant strike leads to a less KO. This is because as a fighter become more developed and skillful with their techniques, they tend to avoid dangerous situations like KO or TKO nowadays. Thus, despite the fact that fighters try to land more significant strikes, it is hard for them to have KO due to the development in skills. Also, KO and significant strikes are much less than compared to the past because as fighters learn more wrestling and jiu-jitsu, in order to avoid the KO or strikes, they tend to take down the opponent. For this slide, I show the histogram to reveal the difference in significant strike percentage of the winner and the loser. To make it clear, I use the above code to calculate the difference, which is the significant strike percentage of the winner minus that of the loser. For this histogram, the more right you go, the winner did more land significant strikes and vice versa. The red line represents the average difference in the significant strike. As you can see, the red line is shifted towards the right side, approximately 10% from the center line of 0%. So it shows that the winner usually has more significant strikes than that of the loser. However, there's always going to be exceptions where the winner has less significant strikes than that of the loser due to the fact that the fight can end with a last-minute lucky punch or submission, or there could be a bad verdict by referee or judges. For this slide, it is the same histogram, but this shows the difference in control time of the winner and the loser. Control time is where the fighter controls the opponent in such situations like clinch, takedown control from the top, and etc. As you can see, the control time peaked at approximately 0 because it seems like fighters prefer to strike without controlling someone, and some fights did not include the data for this. Controlling the opponent is a very stable tactic for a lot of fighters, but there could be a risk. For example, when the fighter tried to close the distance to control someone, the opponent could land an elbow or knee to the head to knock the fighter out. So it is much safer for fighters to keep their distance. Also, when we look at the red line, it shifts to the right side, which shows that usually control time is much higher for the winner than that of the loser. However, there could be some exception where the loser has more control time than the winner. This is because the loser was actually winning the fight but got TKO or KO or submission by the winner at the last minute. For instance, during the Kamaru Usman versus Leon Eder fight, Kamaru Usman has much more significant strikes and the control time than that of Leon until the 5th round where Leon head kicked Kamaru at the last minute. For the last time, to sum this research question up, I make a difference between the correlation of the fight metrics with the outcome of decision fight and non-decision fight, including KO or TKO, submission or other win. I did a calculation of correlation of decision fight minus correlation of non-decision fight. Some of the key terminology that I want to say is that TD means takedown, sub.ATT means submission attempt, KD means knockdown, and CTRL means control time. To clarify this, how this graph works, for instance, in the case of the total strike landed, it seems like total strike landed shifted more to decision fight than that of a non-decision fight, as you can see from the green bar. In the case of the submission attempt, it shifted more towards to a non-decision fight, so it tends to finish the opponents more than going to the decision. Also, when you look at the takedown landed, takedown attempt, and control time, we can see that all of them were shifted to right, which shows that they all tend to more correlate with decision win than non-decision win. This is because, as I told you before, the more fighters become more developed and innovative in their game plan, the more safe method they choose, such as takedowns. However, such stats like submission attempt and knockdown, they tend to be more lead to non-decision fight and have more differences than those variables that are correlated with the decision fight. This shows that despite the fact that fighters choose a safer method, they still want to finish the opponents either submission or KO or TKO for the obvious reason of getting higher payments, and people will come to see fight more often when the specific fighters finish the opponents. Generally speaking, we can say that nowadays fighters become more skillful and develop, so they tend to have safer choice, but they still want to finish their opponents with the non-decision win due to their payment and business. Thanks for listening.